Every documentary you've watched about Korea got this wrong. The most isolated country on Earth wasn't built by a madman. It was built by a boy who watched his entire culture disappear and decided the only way to survive was to become the thing he hated. That boy grew up to rule for 46 years. His grandson still rules today. And the system they built forces 26 million people to collect 1 ton of human feces every year just to grow food. Yes, poop. People lock their outhouses so their neighbors don't steal it. The average wage is $2 per month. Sometimes the trains don't run because there's no electricity, so the passengers get out and push. If you think North Korea is just a crazy dictatorship, if you think it appeared out of nowhere, your heart is about to race. Because this story proved that the most brutal systems are not born from evil. They are born from fear. So what makes a country that survived 2,000 years of invasion turn on its own people? And what single line drawn on a map in 1945 accidentally created a prison for half a nation? By the end of this video, you will know exactly what that line was and why it changed everything. This is not ancient history you can forget. It is the biological blueprint of every system built on the idea that control equals survival. If you have ever watched a system you trusted turn against the people it was supposed to protect, this is not just history, it is your warning. And it is happening right now in a country most people cannot find on a map. You are watching a boy named Kim Il-sung. He was born in 1912. He grew up watching Japan erase Korea from the face of the earth. They forced Koreans to take Japanese names, speak Japanese, worship the Japanese emperor. If you spoke Korean in public, you could be arrested. Japan was not just occupying Korea. Japan was trying to make people forget they were Korean. Kim joined the resistance. He fought the Japanese as a guerrilla fighter, and while he was fighting, he was learning something important. He saw exactly how Japan controlled millions of people. A personality cult around the emperor, rewriting history, eliminating anyone who disagreed, making people forget who they were. Kim studied this blueprint very carefully. He just needed an opportunity to use it. That opportunity came in August 1945. World War II ended. Japan surrendered. Korea was finally free. But you cannot surrender unless you have someone to surrender to. So the Americans and Soviets drew a line right across Korea at the 38th parallel. We'll take the South, you take the North. Just temporary though, right? A few months, then we hold elections. It was not temporary. The Soviets installed Kim Il-sung as their man in the north. The Americans backed Syngman Rhee in the south. The plan was free elections and reunification. But both Kim and Rhee realized that if there were free elections, they might lose. And losing meant losing power. So the temporary line stayed. 1 year, 2 years, 5 years. By 1950, there were not just 2 zones anymore. There were 2 separate countries with 2 separate armies, and they absolutely hated each other. Kim had his territory, Soviet backing, and the blueprint for total control he had learned from Japan. Now he just needed to conquer the South and rule all of Korea. How hard could it be? To understand how a line on a map created a prison, you first need to know what nobody knew in 57 BC. Korea was not one country. It was 3 separate kingdoms, Goguryeo, Baekje, and Silla, constantly at war with one another for 700 years. Imagine 3 brothers fighting over the same bedroom for 7 centuries. That was Korea. Goguryeo, this land is mine. Baekje, not if I take it first. Silla, you'll both have to go through me. And they did, for 700 years. Someone really needed a timeout. Fighting was fierce. Whoever was in charge demanded absolute loyalty. You probably should, because if you did not obey, you probably ended up dead. Eventually, in 668 AD, Silla won. Korea was unified. Great news, right? Not really. Because Korea immediately learned a harsh lesson. A bigger country called China was watching. China was massive, powerful, and right next door. Korean kings quickly realized that if they wanted to survive, they had to bow to Chinese emperors and pay tribute. Basically, Korea became really good at saying, "Yes, sir," while staying independent on the inside. Fast forward to 1392. A new dynasty takes power, Joseon. It would last over 500 years. In 1882, Korea became known as the Hermit Kingdom because it deliberately cut itself off from the outside world. If we stay quiet, bow low, and pay tribute to China, maybe everyone will just leave us alone. And if they do not, then we bow lower. This strategy actually worked for centuries, but Korea's neighbors would not leave it alone. Japan invaded in the 1590s and devastated the country. Later, China, Japan, and Russia all wanted influence over Korea. Korea's solution was to play them against each other. Bow to whoever was strongest. Do whatever it takes to survive. By 1910, Korea had spent 2,000 years learning some brutal lessons. Absolute loyalty to the leader equals survival. Strict hierarchy keeps order. Isolation protects from dangerous outside ideas. And most importantly, control your people completely, or someone else will. If you are already thinking, "How did I not know this?" Subscribing is basically free tuition. One click. That is it. In 1910, Korea disappeared from the map completely. For 35 years. The Japanese occupation was brutal. Forced labor, comfort women used as sex slaves, and Japan tried to erase Korean culture completely. Koreans were forced to take Japanese names, speak Japanese, and worship the Japanese emperor. A young boy named Kim Il-sung watched all this happen. He joined the resistance. He fought the Japanese as a guerrilla fighter. And while he was fighting, Kim was learning something important. He saw exactly how Japan controlled millions of people. A personality cult around the emperor. Rewriting history. Eliminating anyone who disagreed. Making people forget who they were. Kim studied this blueprint very carefully. He just needed an opportunity to use it. They built a resistance. They fought an empire. They had no idea the biggest threat was not the Japanese. It was the boy who watched them. Kim Il-sung made his first public move in early 1950. He traveled to Moscow to meet with Stalin. He had a cunning plan. Kim, "Stalin, let me invade the South. I'll win in 3 weeks. Stalin, 3 weeks? What about the Americans? Kim, they won't fight for Korea. They don't care. It'll be easy. Stalin, you sure about that? Kim, oh yeah, positive. Easy peasy. Spoiler alert, it was not easy peasy. On June 25, 1950, North Korea invaded. And at first, Kim looked like a genius. North Korean forces rolled south with Soviet tanks. Seoul fell in 3 days. The South Korean army scattered. By August, UN and South Korean forces were squeezed into a tiny corner around Busan. One more push, and Kim would win everything. Then things changed. On September 15th, General MacArthur landed troops behind enemy lines at Incheon. It was risky, but it worked. The North Koreans panicked. Within 2 weeks, Seoul was retaken. By October, UN forces were deep inside North Korea. Kim's easy war had become a disaster. North Korea was hours from total defeat. Then China showed up. In late October, hundreds of thousands of Chinese troops poured across the border. They called themselves volunteers, which fooled nobody. UN soldier, are those Chinese troops? Chinese commander, no, just 300,000 volunteers. UN soldier, that's an army. Chinese commander, volunteer army, totally different. Sure, and I'm a volunteer narrator. The war ground to a brutal stalemate right back at the 38th parallel. For 2 more years, armies fought over the same frozen hills. Finally, on July 27, 1953, they signed an armistice. Not a peace treaty, just an agreement to stop shooting. The final toll was really bad. Over 3 million people died, entire cities flattened. And after all that blood, the border ended up exactly where it had started in 1945. Kim's 3-week war lasted 3 years and accomplished nothing except making the division permanent. But lucky for him, after losing the war he started, Kim Il-sung did not get overthrown. Instead, he did something that had never been done before. He made himself a god. Look at this map. See the 38th parallel? See how a line drawn by two men who had never been to Korea became a border that still exists today? The Americans and Soviets accepted Japan's surrender and drew that line. We'll take the South, you take the North. Just temporary. A few months, then elections. It was not temporary. The temporary line stayed for 1 year, then 2, then 5. By 1950, there were 2 separate countries with 2 separate armies. Kim had his territory, Soviet backing, and the blueprint for total control he'd learned from Japan. Now he just needed to conquer the South. The hidden flaw was already visible. While Kim was winning battles against external enemies, he was losing something he did not know he needed: the trust of his own people. For 3 years, Koreans had fought and died. For what? The border was exactly where it started. The war had killed millions, and Kim had started it. But Kim did not see failure. He saw opportunity. The war gave him the perfect excuse. External enemies everywhere, the South, the Americans, the UN. The perfect cover for what came next. If this story has you hooked, subscribing is the only way to not miss the next insane chapter. 1 click. Now, back to Kim. That single decision, to invade the South, to believe that military victory could unify a divided nation, was the moment the system began to crystallize. Not when the purges started, not when the statues appeared. When a man who had watched his culture erased decided that the only way to protect his people was to erase their ability to think for themselves. The daily details became political steps. The radios did not just broadcast propaganda. They could not be turned off. Permanently stuck on the propaganda channel, every home required his portrait. People had to bow to it every morning. If your house caught fire, you had to save Kim's portrait first, even if you died. The word "I" was removed from the language. You could not say, "I love water," only, "We love water." People were taught they were the Kim Il-sung race, not Korean, not Asian. The North Korean language had no words for love, freedom, human rights, or stress, because those things did not exist in their paradise. Kids learned that birds and mice could hear you. Surveillance was everywhere, and if you committed a crime, your kids, parents, and grandkids all went to prison camps too. 3 generations punished for one person's mistake. In 1974, Kim named his son Kim Jong-il as successor. This shocked communists everywhere. Hereditary rule was the opposite of communism. But who would stop a god? Did Kim act alone? The records do not answer. What we know is this: a man who had watched his culture disappear decided that the only way to protect his people was to disappear their ability to question. What we know is this: the system he built would outlast him by decades. The chronicles fall silent on the exact moment Kim decided to become divine, but they do not fall silent on the result. By 1960, Kim stood alone. No rivals left, no opposition, no memory of a time before him. 1991, the Soviet Union collapsed. All aid stopped. This was bad. The Soviets weren't sending food anymore, so people needed to eat. The North Koreans are resourceful people. They can make soup from old boots, but no electricity meant no fertilizer. No fertilizer meant no food. And if that wasn't bad enough, in 1995 and 1996, floods destroyed the farmland. The government stayed silent while people starved. The survival stories are horrific. People ate grasshoppers, tree bark, and rats just to survive. Dead bodies appeared on the streets daily. Some people even resorted to cannibalism, selling human meat in markets as pork. Some estimates show between 2 million and 3.5 million people died. The average North Korean is now 3 to 4 inches shorter than South Koreans because of years without enough food. Kim Jong-il's response to this was, "We can't let the world know our weak points." He learned a crucial lesson from the famine. If you can't feed people, At least make the world too scared to invade. So in 2006, North Korea tested its first nuclear bomb, the ultimate insurance policy. In 2011, Kim Jong-il died. His son, Kim Jong-un, took over at just 27 years old. Experts predicted he'd fail. They were completely wrong. Kim Jong-un proved even more ruthless than his father. He executed his own uncle, Jang Song-taek. He apparently killed his half-brother, Kim Jong-nam, with nerve agent. He accelerated the nuclear program, and in 2017, the world genuinely worried about nuclear war. 2 weeks before the end of the old era, Kim Il-sung had tried to build a paradise. He made it as far as total control. The system was polite. It was also absolute. It bowed. It blocked the path. It said, "Your loyalty is required. Perhaps tomorrow." Tomorrow never came. 3 days before the new reality, the United Nations studied what was happening in North Korea. Not an ordinary matter, they said. The human rights abuses were worse than almost anything they'd seen since World War II. The request was official. The meaning was condemnation. Betrayal wore the robe of law. Therefore, the nuclear program accelerated. Not yet, the world said. Not yet. But the refusal was not protection. It was a countdown. North Korea understood. When the world hesitated, Kim Jong-un became untouchable. He had no allies. He had no escape. He had a country that could not feed its people and could not be invaded. The final morning arrived. The tests continued. They did not shout. They did not burn. They tested. 1 bomb, 2 bombs, 3 bombs. 10,000 scientists working in silence is louder than any battle cry. You are standing at the border. You are watching them approach. You can smell the cold of the DMZ. You can hear the silence of a country that has learned to make no sound. You can see the face of the guard in front. He is not angry. He is doing his job, and his job is watching his own people. Every family must collect 1 ton of human feces yearly for fertilizer. People lock their outhouses so neighbors don't steal it. There are no trash cans because nothing ever gets thrown away. The average wage is $2 per month. Sometimes people have to get out and push the trains because there's no electricity. The regime has forced labor camps where people work in terrible conditions. Women who escape to China often get trapped and can't come home. Right now, hundreds of thousands of North Korean women are stuck there. People can be executed for the smallest things. Letting dust collect on Kim's portrait. Not crying enough when a leader dies. Watching a movie from another country. These tiny crimes can get you killed. In 2014, the United Nations reported on North Korean human rights abuses. They said these abuses were worse than almost anything they'd seen since World War II. 26 million people live under this system right now. The wildest part is, while you've been watching this video, nothing has changed. Same darkness, same hunger, same fear. The world absorbed it quietly. Not because they didn't care, because they cared too much. Because speaking meant intervening, and intervening meant admitting that the system they had helped create was still killing people. None had been divided like this. None had been isolated like this. None had been turned into a laboratory for total control like this. A country, split by a line, frozen in time, ruled by a family that had learned from the Japanese occupiers how to erase a nation's memory. The international community had been appalled. We didn't create this, they said. We didn't participate, they said. We were shocked, they said. But the chronicles do not support this. The difference between truth and survival is that survival writes the history. There was no reunification. There was no liberation. There was no acknowledgement that the world had drawn a line in 1945 and walked away. The absence was the sentence. The silence was the humiliation. Therefore, the division was inevitable. They installed 2 Koreas, because it was useful, because it was strategic, because no one wanted to fight another war over a peninsula most people couldn't find on a map. No one was afraid of a famine. That was their second mistake. The same line, the same 38th parallel. 70 years later, the border is still there. The same armies, the same silence. The hidden winner was never centered, never tried, never explicitly named. She was the Korean people. The ones who survived, the ones who remembered, the ones who passed down stories in whispers. No one centered on them. No one named them. What survives is what the survivors chose to preserve. But here is what the records show and rarely emphasize. What they did to Korea was not an aberration. It was a precedent. The line drawn in 1945 became the blueprint. The next country that got divided by superpowers would face the same silence, the same suffering, the same forgetting. Someone had to know. Someone had to draw that line. Someone had to walk away. Think about what that requires. Think about the coldness of that decision. The line was not just geography, it was a message. The message was, you are on your own. We are back at the line, the 38th parallel, 1945. Dust, ink, a map. You are standing at that line again. The question was never really about how Korea was divided. It was about why. At the end of a world war with no weapons left, no armies marching, no empires falling, they still drew a line. They still split a nation in half. I know, I couldn't believe it either. A world that had just defeated fascism still thought it was okay to divide people like property. That is the tragedy that history buries under the politics. That is the human moment the chronicles forgot. History offers 3 answers, and they do not fully agree. 1. The superpowers divided Korea because they needed spheres of influence. Potsdam Conference records. The maps do not lie. 2 men, 1 line. No Koreans in the room. The Americans and Soviets divided the world like a cake. Korea was a slice. Therefore, the division was not about Korea. It was about the next war. It is like if 2 landlords split a building and the tenants had no say. Same math, same silence. Different century, same forgetting. 2. The division was temporary, so the plan was never permanent. Control was. The men who drew the line knew exactly what would happen. The temporary was the countdown. They did not build walls, they just held the door open. They made division inevitable without making it explicit. That is the oldest trick in power. Never order what you can permit. Never permit what you can predict. Never predict what you can deny. 3. The Koreans themselves allowed it. The third lives in the silence. The records do not answer it. The border does. Who accepted the line? Who built the walls? Who decided that 70 years of division was acceptable? Think about what that requires. Think about the coldness of that acceptance. The border was not just a line, it was proof of loyalty to the system. The records do not answer it. The border does. Never at the center, never explicitly named. What survives is what the survivors chose to preserve. Not strategy, not diplomacy, not necessity. It was a message. The message was, the system defends itself. Therefore, the system survives. So the next divided nation learns, or dies. 70 years later, the Korean peninsula still lives in the shadow of that line. South Korea became an economic powerhouse. North Korea became a nuclear-armed prison. The same people, the same language, the same history. 2 completely different worlds. The door is still there. The line is still there. The system that made this possible did not disappear. It evolved. It learned to hide better. It learned to divide slower. It learned to make the victim look like the villain. It learned to call division by prettier names. It learned to wait. It is still waiting. It is always waiting. But Korea was not the last to be divided. 20 years later, another country got split by a line drawn by men who had never been there, and the consequences are still killing people today. Click here to watch How the Vietnam Division Destroyed a Nation. I'll catch you next time. The line was never officially explained. Someone drew it. We still don't know why.